Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us today. We really appreciate that. And we're going to talk today about creating a work optional plan together. So we hope that you'll be able to take away at least 5 to 7 points, as well as we're going to discuss the 12 retirement mistakes that people often make with their retirement plans. So we're going to take questions at the end of the presentation. So as we go, feel free to enter into the questions or chat section. There's a questions section on the side of your portfolio that will tell you how to enter questions, and Trish will read them out at the end of the session. If people have to go, there's also going to be a replay at 6 p.m. today for people that wanted to watch the hockey game. So we just juggled that around a little bit, but we'll answer a lot of the questions if we don't have time. You'll see that there again later, and you'll also see it on our YouTube page. So thanks again for taking the time. I hope you enjoy your lunch.
Why do we always refer to it as work optional? We don't think of it as a destination, like it's not retirement and then you hit that moment and then fun begins. It's not like previous generations, and it's not like anybody else. You're going to create your own path, your own story. But what we find is when we help people calculate when they become work optional as a financial test, they often don't stop working or they don't stop creating income. Sometimes they'll create self-employment income or phase themselves out of a previous career or potentially stop entirely. But we like to think of it as when work becomes optional, what do you do? And it's not just at a future point in time, it's all the way through today. And we always have believed it's living the best lifestyle possible today that you also can plan for and save for the future. So we often get asked, what is the difference between a retirement savings plan or a simple forecast and really getting into what we call like blueprinting and strategizing retirement income? So if you're more than 10 years away from that point in time that you might make that big decision, it really is about retirement savings, which is really looking at what you're earning and where you're applying the difference between that and what you're spending. So, and what you're spending really is that foundation. So we like to talk about it as minimally acceptable lifestyle, not minimum, but really identifying and owning your numbers makes a big difference. So if we're helping you allocate those savings, a lot of times it's paying down mortgage or other debt, but otherwise it's which savings account gets more of your funds and how do you put a certain percentage to each, and that changes over time. Within 10 years of actually making that big decision and using this plan that we create together as a tool to make big decisions, that's when you'll be looking at, okay, well, how do we, do we have enough? And then what sources of income come from which places over time? And it really is an architecture or a blueprint, and it takes quite a bit of time to figure that out. So the foundation for security and confidence, which is really the emotions around this big transition, really is derived from owning your numbers, collaborating together, and there is no replacement for that. We can't do that for you, but we'll certainly give you a bunch of tools for that. So our goal today is really to identify what's your role, what's our role, how we can collaborate together on this planning. The next slide is talking about rallying and rally racing. So I really like this analogy in a way. And for those of you that are not familiar with this, is this crazy car going down a crazy dirt road with a lot of zigzags, which is maybe indicative of life, but there's a notion here called a co-driver. And that co-driver is really holding on to the pace notes, or what they're called. And those pace notes and what that guy's talking about is what lies ahead, where to turn, the severity of the turn, and what obstacles to look out for. That's really kind of how we see our role, is as your co-driver. We don't have our hands on the wheel. We're not choosing that path for you, but we're certainly there as a guide. So I'd like to start looking at the notion of retirement. A lot of people don't understand and realize where this came from. It's a simple concept, right? It isn't a useful construct from many, from the perspective of most. Retirement, just in terms of like a date, was really created as a German invention in 1889 by Chancellor Otto von Bismarck, because there weren't enough jobs, and they were trying to say, okay, older people need to make room for the younger people to stimulate the economy. That arbitrary age of 65 was chosen just in relation to the average lifespan at the time of 67. So that's typically why we don't think of the notion of retirement as a useful construct. It's like, well, own it and use it and see what you want to do for your own life. And some people, quit work and the conventional concept of work by the time they're 50. Others, are in their 70s and still doing stuff that creates income. So the stats behind this is in 1900, the number of people working beyond age 65 reduced to 65% from 78%. By 1930, there was 58%, 1960, 31%, and by the year 2000, only 16% of people older than 65 were working. So a lot of other countries adopted this concept from that German invention. So to each their own, we'll figure out your own path and your own story through that. So we always try to build in Kermit and a sense of fun to these sessions. It's really your own path, and a lot of times what we're finding is, Canadians out there, like, there's a lot of examples here. Some just cover their eyes, hope for the best when they kind of reach that age, or some people live for today and party nonstop. A lot of people, unfortunately, panic as that decision was maybe taken away from their hands due to an illness or a layoff due to their career. Others start a new career and they're meeting new people. A lot of people go back to school, get a new degree. In certain provinces, you can actually go and attend classes as a retiree for free. So maybe you're just educating yourself that much more or reading newspapers all day. The point is, it's your path, it's you can chart your own course and we'll help you get there. And the financial framework will derive what you get from life and how much joy you yield from that.
We just want you to be prepared for it.
Yeah, and so another way to think of it, and we've got this in the handouts that are attached to the presentation, and you may have heard of this already, is the National Geographic researched areas of longevity across the world. They call them blue zones. And so they really looked at the common elements for those societies or those cultures. And the common elements often were just maintaining social engagement, not smoking, being physically active, and strong family values, but also a sense of contribution to that community. One culture that I zeroed in on is just in Japan, the island of Okinawa. They don't even have a word for retirement. And instead, they have the word ikigai, which Pam and I were introduced to a few years ago. And literally, it translates to the reason you wake up in the morning. And the concept of that conference that we attended was just putting a placard on your night table and identifying what you're waking up for in the morning, just to give yourself that sense of purpose. So that sense of purpose and fulfillment that you might be getting right now from work or from your community or volunteering, like, it's important to maintain those positive elements through life after work.
So,
Go
beginning
ahead.
today, we kind of talked about this session and what you want to be taking home from it. And I think you've heard it in our other sessions that we've done with Scott Armstrong, to which I'll talk to those slides today. It's just really like, so many people we talk to out of our client base still today is, I don't know what I'm going to do in retirement. I'm going to golf. I'm going to garden. Well, you can't do that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so, what we're trying to get at with people with that is, what does that vision look like for you today? And, where does your vision go on each of these different areas? So, adventure, what else are you going to tackle in your life? What else are you going to do? Your purpose. Purpose is something beyond you. So something like charities, donations, time you spend maybe with the church, or time you spend with your groups that you're going to do. What's your purpose beyond you? Vitality, so your health, your exercise. What else can you do from an activity standpoint, or even from a mindfulness meditation standpoint? What else can you do to actually enhance those? How are you going to leave a living legacy? Some people are saying, I want to have buildings named after me, or I want to have bursaries for other kids in university because I went through this or that, or my kid is going through this or that. I want to leave a legacy beyond me. I want to leave a legacy that my kids can actually work on with me. Then the social element. As everybody knows, as you get older, your social circles tend to get smaller and smaller. So it's like, how can you expand those circles of family, of friends, of community out there to actually help yourself get bigger? And all of those things, the last dot is finances. Finances are the small little circle at the bottom, but tend to have so much involvement in everything you do because you need that cash available to do all the things you want to do as well. So that's why we want to talk about them. We want to talk about the trips you want to take and the travel you want to do, and what the bigger picture is that you see for yourself, your family, your future, and how you actually want to take that away.
It's in terms of your role, it's never too early to start creating that plan. So what would you do if you were work optional? Another way to think of it is what would you do if you won the lottery? But it's not just a lottery of money. This is kind of like looking at the lottery of time as well. And if you do any research, you watch some of those reality shows, like the majority of lottery winners aren't successful in having more joy in life, right? So it takes planning. But if you look at what would you do if you were work optional, what would you do if you were on vacation, if you were on sabbatical for a year? And it's like, why can you not build some of that into daily life? So there's no one right way to do this and approach this, and we'll provide some core planning structures and tools, but you can add to that as well. One that I'm really fond of lately is Strategic Coach, and Dan Sullivan has created a concept talking about just the 4 essential freedoms in life. So one of the big things is just time, clarity, direction, and control of your focus. But through using our approach and working together, our goal is to give you more freedom in each of these areas, time being one of them. The financial freedom is accomplished through, the financial planning that we can help create, fulfillment and purpose. Like that's what kind of Pam is relating to in terms of like the other sessions that we've done or the programs that are still available. It's like the Mind Switch program through Scott Armstrong is literally trying to switch your mindset and manage your perspective. So fulfillment and purpose is really maybe the most individual, unique thing that you'll have to create. And then
And I think
connections and relationships. Yeah.
oh, sorry. Go ahead, Kel.
Oh, just connections and relationships. It's interesting to note sometimes it's like the people that you surround yourself with, and you never stop making friends from one angle, right? And one goal. But surround yourself with people that are older, that are younger than you, and make sure that they are giving back positivity and energy as opposed to just sucking that away from you. But the ever increasing freedom is just another tool to kind of look at. And we're going to come out with some exercises and materials here, just like Scott's program and that booklet. But,
And
Pam.
the more we see, with a lot of our retirees is, it's difficult to move from an employment status of earning money, whether you're self-employed or whether you're an employee, to all of a sudden taking your own money where you don't have that income and the freedom anymore. And I think, the things that we continually see is I have nothing else. It's fun to go out for dinner. It's fun to go do those things that you do, but it's like, what else? What else am I going to do? And they're like, wow, I didn't think I'd have so much time on my hands. I didn't, my husband's driving me crazy because he's in the kitchen all the time. You hear that, and it's like, wow, she's driving me crazy because I don't have the same mental stimulation that I had at work with my colleagues. So that's where we want to fill all these boxes. And we want to figure out how you can do that better so that you can live the life that you've always dreamt of. And that's the goal of this, because we're constantly seeing that as an issue as people move along.
So the complicated nature of creating a comprehensive guide to generating income on the scale of technical assistance needing like advisors and help, sure, like this visual shows you that it's at the top right. So we're not going to be super technical today. A lot of that's in the backstage. A lot of that, we can cover for you, right? Some of the hardcore technical calculations and some of the risk management prep that we'll get into. But what we can't do for you is, a lot of the softer elements, but that's also not what we're doing today. Today, we're looking at more of a comprehensive plan together. So it still will require, I think, financial checkups or tests, what we call vitals. And one of the big things that you can do to provide help for us is to provide that data. A lot of the data points come from mortgage statements or tax returns. For some of you, we've got a direct connection to your accountants, but others we don't. So if you know that there's data points and information missing, property assessments, your TFSA room, RSP room, things going on with your parents or your kids, like your requests and comments and actions will drive the value to you from our help. We'll outline our core engagement and our process, and we'll have those regular connections, and we'll update net worth and all those ratios that we talk about here. And that will yield a plan that you can use as a decision-making tool. But it's important to just go back and say, okay, well, if happiness and whatnot and fulfillment are byproducts of your actions, it's like, having the financial freedom and the other freedoms that we mentioned, that's where it'll all work together. And so I think making the time for that consistent connection, typically we want to connect every 4 months, usually it's online, but that I think will yield cumulative progress and the results that you want to achieve going forward. So the big thing is cash flow. You don't want to be a cartoon on the left, right? Where, you're going to figure out who's going to wear the mask and who's going to drive the getaway car. So, and I think that this can be fun, right? We'll help with like the, interpreting tax returns, looking at that, looking at a proactive, what's happening is, this next year, the same as your last year. Some of our software tools really focus on the 5-year cash flow outlook, and then we'll crunch it down to say, okay, this year, what are the big exciting spends that are in your control, and what are we targeting for savings and making sure we hit that through the year.
So the biggest thing is to know your numbers. And when I say that, and why I come up with this graph here, is this is your traditional graph of how the budget should work out as you're coming out of university, you're starting your first home, you're kind of getting into your initial budgeting. As you're kind of seeing with most of you that are on this call today, that's going to change dramatically as you go through life. So as you get older, obviously, which we'll talk about in the next couple of slides, medical gets more expensive. Or you start saying, hey, I need to start saving more because I'm not doing as much. Or your personal discretionary also increases as you make more. All of these things, and inflation have become an issue with even food. Housing costs have become massive. And so when I say this is, we often hear from a lot of our clients, well, my neighbors are doing this and how come I can't do this? And it's like, I often come back and say, I have no idea what your neighbors do. I have no idea what your neighbors save. I have no idea your neighbor's wealth. I can't tell you what your neighbor or your colleague or, this and that person's doing different things. You need to know your own numbers. You don't want to ever compare to the Joneses. You want to live the life that you want to live. And I think it's really grinding down and knowing these numbers, planning these numbers, knowing, what you want to do for your kids, what you want to do for other things that all budget into this. And it's too often we see people haven't really planned that out. It's like, here's what I want for now, and I don't know about all these other years. And I think, there's this notion that it kind of goes linear. It doesn't. And that's the thing is these expenses don't always stay the same, and they don't always go linear either. A lot of them change dramatically.
Well, and there's the notion too, Pam, of budgets, and you have to live underneath a number, and you have to fit within these components of this particular pie chart. That's not your pie chart, but I think the point is that we say, okay, well, that's why we try to change the language, and we work on that together, where we talk about lifestyle level, and you're choosing, and that might change through the aspects and your timeline of life, right? So through like, today as well as in retirement, you're going to have needs versus wants, right? And so I think of it as like a paycheck or a play check. So the basic needs can be covered through basic core streams of income. And if you've got multiple streams of income, it'll be that much more sustainable and a stronger retirement income. And then the fun stuff that can be more easily planned, because you don't have to spreadsheet every month and use an app. Like, that's not the game, and that's not the point, and that's not the pressure we're applying. But we can't look at those numbers for you. You've got to kind of help create and understand that and share it with us. And lifestyle wants, and there's ways to make that more fun. So on the next slide, my proposition or my philosophy or my approach or my suggestion that I've seen work in the past is to scrap all the the spreadsheets and all the heavy work, right? It's make it a little bit more fun, especially when it comes to like partners and conversations, or even, with parents or kids, for example. Like the same concepts apply now, just as when we were all like, finishing post-secondary or, high school and whatnot, and getting a start to adulting, all the way through to like being a senior citizen in a facility, a helped facility. The same concept here will apply, right? Is that you need to know what that looks like for your lifestyle level. So the boring stuff, right? The fixed monthly burn rate, that's relatively easy, and you can be identified quite quickly. The stuff on the bottom left, sure, if you have regular entertainment that is a consistent amount per month, I've seen clients take like cash out per week and put in an envelope for like date night or fun times. Like there's no one right way other than something that you can make consistent. So the stuff on the top right, the necessary, the fixed annual, like that might be like property tax, insurances, because if you pay your insurance for home and for vehicle annually, you save those dollars, and there's benefit to being organized and prepared for that. But otherwise, the fun stuff on the bottom right, like why can't you set up a plan and send dollars toward different categories and plan shopping sprees? There's less guilt, more fun. You know the number; it's part of the plan. We've seen that worked really well. Like for myself, it's every May and November. So May is after tax time, and then November is before Christmas. They're approximately 6 months away. And that's when I'll go back and say, okay, what's the discretionary stuff? Travel, gifts, wants, and gifts is a key thing, right? Especially as kids and grandkids and that type of thing show up, or donations. It's like, what can you actually afford to give, and how do you make that more intentional? But some of the fun stuff, even like wardrobe changes or gardening or hobbies or bikes and golf clubs for myself, it's like you make that more intentional. It could be more fun. So it doesn't have to be one spreadsheet or one app or one method. So it can be once or twice a year, and you just look and see if your numbers are making sense. And that's where we kind of go back and say, okay, well, let's pre-authorize the difference for some of these categories and save for that renovation or save for that big trip. So if you systematize your savings, a lot of times it makes it easy to spend what's remaining. Or typically there's only 3 or 4 categories that change through the month and through the year. So then if you just track what that looks like from Costco receipts or that type of thing. So we'd employ you and implore you to like take more time and effort to make it an easy to manage system. And then later in life, if lifestyle level changes upwards intentionally or downwards through retirement, you'll know those numbers in that baseline, because the quality of the long-term forecast is intimately dependent on the accuracy and the quality of data that's supplied to it.
Absolutely. All through life's journey, and when I talk about the life cycle of people, from when you're a teen and just learning how to budget, and you're learning how to, save for your first home, and how are you going to graduate, what are you doing with your buddies, kind of thing, to, hey, I've met somebody that I really would like to marry. I'd like to get into a new house. Maybe we're having kids then. Maybe we're doing stuff like that. Um, through each age of life, really, the development cycle of life is you have, these different needs and wants. And of course, once your kids are growing up, it becomes a really big need. As your kids are growing up, you have to pay for education. You start actually living for your children, where it's like, I don't even have time to plan my own life. I'm going to this sport thing. I'm doing this thing. I'm doing that thing with them. And I'm actually developing my own, life cycle around my kids, is basically how that works. That we start looking at, 50s, you finally have time to kind of start thinking about, what do I need? What do I want? And that's where we start saying, people get caught into, well, my kids are finishing post-secondary. I want to help them with a house. I want to help them with their weddings. I want to help them with everything. But are you okay? And by the time you're 60, you can't start thinking about that, because of course that's as you notice the cycle starts going down, where you have to have your own expenses, you have to have your own interests. Your kids don't really want to hang out with mom and dad anymore because they have their own lives. And it's like, you want to have your own interests, you want to plan your own travel, you want to plan your own care at the end of the day. That's a big one. And that starts to become where, we often talk about that sandwich generation, of where you're entering that phase, because You also have parents that are entering care in the later end of that cycle in their 80s and 90s, where they may not come home. They may not come home from the hospital that day after falling in the bathroom. And that's where we often say, start having those conversations earlier, where, if you need care, or, some people through COVID, that was a great reality check of, how do I want my care to be received? Do I want to be in these care homes? Do I want to be locked up with other people? Or do I like the entertainment of other people? Do I like the social aspect of other people? And, I'm having those conversations with my parents now. So you're starting to see we're having those conversations with clients and their parents now. And then it's like, well, we may not be able to worry about kids and grandkids as much there if we have both generations pulling at us. And we also have to worry about our own planning. So you can see how difficult that big picture can get, because it's really about, clever execution on that, and making sure that you can actually get through all of those stages and how you want to plan it and what that big picture looks like for you.
Well, I think that's like a lot. That's overwhelming, which is life, right? The whole life cycle of a plan. Like your lifestyle level might change 5, 10, 15 times over life, which is fine, right? You might have less savings capacity when you've got the busiest moment of kids in the house, late teenagers, and then your savings rate may, dramatically increase, in empty nest years, or the nanny example, right? If there's a big nanny expense when kids are young and then the nanny expense goes away, well, then that should be applied back to mortgage or back to savings. So, I think it's requires planning. Hence why we're here. Hence why we've got our system and our regular connections. So we got to guide you through all of this, because we think in terms of decades for you, enabling you to think in terms of like this month and this week, basically.
And that's why we want to project those costs into your plan, because if we haven't projected those costs in your plan, how do we know that you have enough? And I
Yeah.
think that comes down to this. People often ask us for stats. So here's what the stats look like. And so when people say, can I live off CPP? Well, the average annual household spending by age group for those even in 55, of course, you're not usually retired absolutely at 55, but 64 grand. Then 55 to 65, which some people do start to think about retiring, that's $70,000. And, all of a sudden you look at your 56, and then all of a sudden 65 and then 75, you tend to be less active. So when we call these numbers, we call them the go-go years, the slow-go years, and the no-go years, where basically maybe sometimes your travel drops off because of these things. And over time, that's kind of what we look at even for your plan, is basing it on those different categories. Your housing expenses too, people often say to me, well, I've got my mortgage paid off. And that will make a big change. And I'll show you why that doesn't actually make a big change in your financial plan. But you can see here, your housing expenses really don't drop off that much. You just tend to care less. Is kind of, if your roof caved in, you'd have to replace your roof. But you tend not to have to do all the renos you feel like you need to do when you're in your 50s and make your house look great and have your friends over all the time. You'll start to notice older people, they have a lot of their doilies and a lot of things that they haven't renoed over time, and that's where it decreases.
Or you downsize to a condo, there's fewer home
Exactly.
renos or improvements that you make.
Exactly. And that becomes important too, Kelly. Good point of downsizing. Definitely.
But each category of expense might change at different intervals through a life cycle.
Absolutely. And this is why I say, like, when people have your $1,400 a month mortgage payment, and all of a sudden it's like, well, you know what, I'm spending $15,000 a year on mortgage payments. Well, you know what, by the time that you're 80, and things like our family histories, whether you work out, you dodge all of that when you're younger, and you're like, I can dodge all of that. But usually family histories do catch up with you, which a lot of physicians who are on this call would likely agree with me on. This is actually stats that are out there from Stats Canada, from the insurance companies as well, is the healthcare costs go up dramatically. And you sometimes have a seniors plan that'll cover some of it, but you'll obviously need, when you leave work, your own medical plan to cover this, because as you can see, that's more than your mortgage payment.
Yeah, typically 15% of expenses should be allocated to medical through your retirement years. But each category, like we said, may change, but total expenses typically reduce over time. So this infographic, I love visuals, and what it's trying to do is put together some of those concepts that we've just covered into one slide. So lifestyle level will increase, and it should be intentional. And then as you have your income invariably increasing, whether you've got a high growth career or your business, you take more compensation from your group of companies. The point is to enable more savings as your income and your revenues grow. And then through your peak earning years, again, allocating all those savings is relatively easy. The financial components of the plan are relatively easy if we take the time and do it together. And then typically later in life, if you can lower your lifestyle level down at certain intervals, sometimes when we create a baseline scenario together, right? And typically we're doing that in our connection between May and July every year. We start the retirement forecast with a linear and saying, okay, well, let's say it's $8,000 of lifestyle expenses, indexed to inflation forever, and then we test the plan that way. But one of the first toggles or one of the first areas of control is if someone says, okay, well, I'm crystal clear on today's lifestyle, and then sure. So in future years, maybe typically at like age 70 or 80, let's lower that down to these amounts. You can modify those categories and say, okay, well, here's what I think I'd spend, and we can input that into the plan. So in a year over year basis, when we modify that plan together and test the impact, you just end up getting closer to retirement, or maybe end up like, we're stopping work earlier or phasing yourself out earlier because of the use of this plan. But we need a runway, and a runway by years, like 5 to 10 years at a minimum of iterations of those plans, because you never know the path of that. So this analogy it's called a spaghetti model for a hurricane path. They don't necessarily know what that path is going to look like, but on the next slide it shows like there's a range of possibilities. And even though there's a lot of variation there and it's one tool with limitations, it's still pretty essential. So I think that's the same thing that we're trying to do for your future life over the rest of your life, is to model that forecast together. So look at the impact maybe sometimes of one change, like what if you double travel expenses between 60 and 70, for example? Or what if inflation is more than what we've forecasted and agreed on together? Because we'll create those assumptions together through our work, and then we update that plan. So I think the forecasters talk about 4 key principles that are still super relevant to, I think, our planning and how we're looking at what we're trying to say is your retirement forecasting. And that is stay informed, be aware, regularly monitor, and expect change, right? Change is that inevitable thing that will always be constant.
Yeah, life always happens, and that's the thing, is you gotta think about those things. People often bring to us too, which I want to challenge you to bring to us. People sometimes say, you know what, I want to spend now, and I'm going to give up what's on the backside. I want to have all my money gone. I want to have no tax on my death. I want to plan for just running out of money. Do we run the risk of outliving your money? Some people come to us and say, tax efficiency is my number one thing, but does it come at the expense of everything else? Maybe there's some things that you really want that would hurt your heart, that you kind of go, I'd like to do this for my kids. And I really impressed on people, like, sit and do some thinking about all these kind of things. Some people say, I just want to leave everything to my kids. I want my kids to have everything. I've given up everything in my life, so I'm good to do that, and I'm good to spend all that on my kids. And other people are like, what, my health is most important. So everybody has a different philosophy of how this looks, and that will also give us a different philosophy on how we plan. And when we bring up like accountants and lawyers and people like that who have their own companies, really important, because a lot of accountants have even turned around and said to us, wow, like, this is awesome, because had I known that like 10 years ago, I would have done things totally different with them. And I think that's where we've always tried to work, is that family office, bringing in the professionals into these scenarios, because this isn't just, you know, us working on this. It's like we want all your professionals all on page, you know, following your priorities to what you want to do, because oftentimes people are just throwing numbers at everything and just going, geez, I hope this works out. And it's like, we don't want that to happen. We want to actually plan that.
Well, and some people have no kids, right? So it's just, to each their own in terms of your priorities. But what we normally hear is like, okay, I want to focus on, my choice and flexibility and ensuring your quality of life over your whole life cycle. That's what our plan and our approach is designed to do. And so I think if we just work together and create that, you'll have that, and then if there's some efficiency at the end of the day in terms of like minimizing tax or maximizing the give because you've been able to have, what you want through your retirement years and make those decisions, like really, if I just tell you the bottom line, it's like we want to be here, at age 80, looking back over your 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s, leaving no regrets. So we're looking at using that body of knowledge to help you, chart action today.
Yeah, and
So,
that's why we kind of harass you to know your numbers in some senses, to really work on those numbers, because it's like if you just live for today and you just keep doing that, it's like we haven't really planned, and then all of a sudden it comes as a big shock when you're used to living that $200,000 lifestyle, let's say, and all of a sudden it's like, well, I have enough money for 50.
yeah, we can give
So
you
we
that
want to
reality
make
check.
sure that you have all of that in there.
Yeah, and you've got a partner here, right? We've got a deep team with all of our associates included, and other professionals that you might work with that we can coordinate with. But then you've got a team that can help coordinate all the work aspect of this, right? All the boring details or the technical details. We can minimize your involvement into it, and you can be, there's a lot of the fun stuff, but it still takes a collaborative effort together. We don't have your retirement plan in hand without you. But then just to work through these the risk management angles and to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing on that end of things, I'm just going to quickly go through the 12 risks to derail a retirement plan. The biggest risk that we see is not following a plan at all and not having a long-term strategy. Like it takes years and decades, like we had in the life cycle, to really optimize a plan for specific priorities, whether it's cascading generational wealth, or it's just maximizing your ability to travel around the world. Like there's no right way to approach it, but it does take years for that. So if you don't have a plan, and sometimes we get introduced to people that are thinking that they're a year or two away from retirement and they've done nothing to test or plan for that, I'm not going to work magic and have a magic wand in that regard. We need a runway of 5 to 10 years, but you've got to follow that plan. So another risk is just lower awareness or intention when it comes to income and expense planning. The way I look at it is, potentially a lot of times when I'm meeting people in their 30s and 40s, they don't necessarily want to work till they're 65. And they want to have the ability to be work optional when they're 50 or 55. So you can literally buy years off your career simply by changing your spending pattern. Don't even have to change the same amount. But if you change the spending pattern and have it more intentional, you can be more efficient, like those planned shopping sprees I related to, or just efficiency by spending on property tax and vehicle insurance annually saves those dollars. So can you have the same lifestyle with a lower amount spent? So number 3 is unbalanced net worth map or undue exposure. Sometimes you can take on way too much risk with some high flyer neighbor, coworker ideas for how to get rich quick that fails and sets you back. The opposite is true, is if we're just sitting on too much cash for too long. So that's what we talk about, understanding what your net worth map is and diversifying that out. Number 4 is market volatility or downturn panic. A lot of times, even to this day and this week, we're still getting some commentary in terms of like, oh, I don't like this rate of return. Well, do you like your blood pressure for this year as well? Like rate of return is something we absolutely monitor, but it's risk adjusted rate of return or it's real rate of return. And you got to think of it as a long-term rate of return. So we absolutely have to have some exposure to equities and things that are higher risk. But we're going to be talking a little bit later about like public market exposure versus private market exposure and making sure that you don't have too much impact on a crazy investment market impacting your retirement choices.
Yeah, it's too important to, as we've discussed, to protect the downside is the most important when you're starting to look at retirement, which is where all of our clients are at or getting to in the next 10 years. So that's why we've made some of the moves we've made is you want to take some of that risk off the table. And you might neglect some return on that, but you want to take and protect the downside as well. And we've had some people who say, you know what, like I'm going all GICs towards retirement, and that's too risk off. Is sometimes you're too risk off on that, where it's like, it might look great if the market's turned down, but then if you have all your eggs in that basket, you're not meeting as close to inflation as what you want to be meeting either after tax. And now
Yeah.
the interest rates are higher, so it looks pretty good, but it hasn't for all of history. So history's always shown us some of the equity markets have, and sometimes people go way too conservative for what they need for numbers.
Yeah, so with your core investment accounts, you might have an 18% rate of return in a given year, might be minus 4%. So both of those have happened in the last 5 years. The key is to have a party and a team of experts at the front line managing that, making the right decisions, not employing emotion when we make those decisions, buying in regularly, maybe especially when the markets have that volatility and that downward trend, right? I'm not sure we're ever going to be happy with our rates of return in terms of that, but it's more of a byproduct. And what we're happy with is how we're managing those accounts, but more importantly, your net worth and your overall plan. But inflation can't be overlooked. And so that's another risk. And how you do that is by having a well diversified pool of accounts and then a plan to draw income from your group of accounts. So number six is often a risk that takes shape later in life. So giving too much to children and grandchildren. Rather, it's like, let's make that part of your intentional plan, and maybe you sacrifice some other categories to give more to grandchildren if that's your choice. The byproduct of our approach together is to give you that flexibility and that choice. Number seven, a lot of times I've heard Pam talk about the sandwich generation in terms of right now, a lot of our clients are facing pressure and stress from their parents and maybe financial needs that they have to give their parents in terms of time and effort and money, but also their kids and their adult kids in today's day and age that might need help with like down payments. So those are all risks. And so a lot of times what we're doing is years in advance, if you maximize savings for kids, later in the early stages of your retirement, you're able to give them pre-planned help that doesn't affect your retirement timeline. So just, mindful of time and keeping on quickly. Number eight, major illness and potentially not having a plan or enough buffer, right? So insurance is just one portion of risk management, should transfer some portions of risk. A lot of risks are inherently, absorbed and taken on by yourself. So major illness is one, but in your 30s or 40s, if we had a critical illness plan that might save you when you're in your late 70s, that's a benefit and an advantage and an example of why we look at it across a whole life cycle of a
And
person's
wouldn't,
life and the
yeah, wouldn't,
person's and the planning
wouldn't bring
approach.
down your assets for sure.
Yeah. So significant unexpected costs is number nine. That could be a home or major car expenses. Doesn't change. In retirement, we'll still be meeting regularly, doing a pulse check, looking at how life's changing to update the plan. Number 10 is a lot of times the inefficient tax planning that we see. So again, proactively planning your tax return in advance, which is something that we can support. You don't want to have an unpleasant surprise in retirement by not having enough withholding from some of those places to have a big tax bill in April. So number 11 is how you draw down on various accounts. So again, it's literally once we get close to the point in time where you stop or reduce work, it's blueprinting your retirement income plan over decades. But if we've had a few years to talk through that, you're more in control and you feel confident with the pools of assets. Like I don't want to have just a whole bunch of RSPs entirely exposed to public investment markets and a mortgage-free house, and we've got two assets to draw from. That's very inefficient, actually. So we want a whole pool and a source and a multiple revenues from different income sources. 12, outliving your money. So that would be great, right? If you've got a, a longevity, which is, more than you think today, right? If you think, hey, I'm going to probably get to 90, and like you said, Pam, based on family history, early 90s maybe. But through advancements in technology, over time, you might actually hit 100, and you don't want to have a lower quality of life in your later years. So there's ways that we can employ different ways to like buffer, typically with using home equity in your retirement plan. So this visual is just to take a break from all of those words. And it's just saying like what we employ is a concept or a philosophy to try to protect your ability to continually grow. So some of that insurance that you've taken out earlier in life or awareness over your spending is also key to creating some extra savings that you might cover some of those risks that, on your own. And the next slide kind of does the same thing. So earlier in life, and as you're really doing well in your career and you've got a lot of years left that you could work, you have more capacity to take on unexpected expenses or expected and planned, like your big life list items that are really expensive. I'd rather people do that, as they've got that income. Take that work sabbatical. Do that worldwide cruise or month-long European trip when the kids are the right age. Like to each their own, but you can afford that more when you've got more human capital, meaning capacity to earn. In retirement, if you've got less than that, you've got to rely more on your financial capital. You've got less capacity to earn and grow, and maybe you're not as employable when you're late 60s or through your 70s as you were when you're at the peak of your expertise in your 40s and 50s. So it all relates to that plan. So another big risk is just income earning in down markets. You don't want to have volatile markets dictate what you can do in your retirement fun time. So on the next slide, there's three different paths here. So $100,000 invested. It's not typical that we can get 7% every year over a variety of years, but that's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve a consistent, stable parameter of compounding returns there. So the roller coaster ride, whether you're on the kiddie roller coaster or the adult roller coaster, you see more volatility in the middle line or the bottom line. And so in the early part of it, everybody got to the same end destination, right? But the ride and the experience was more stressful for others. And we test your capacity for risk, and we look at suitable investments, and we look at a variety of options. That's part of our ongoing due diligence. But when it comes to withdrawing money, it matters. So if you are taking money out in down years, you might end up with less, like the person on the bottom line versus the middle line. So that's what we have on the next slide, talking about a reserve fund or a cash wedge, so that we've got a 3-year buffer of planned expenses. Shocker, back to knowing your numbers and what you've got coming up. It's like, okay, here's what my lifestyle level is, and it's super exciting and fun because I'm going to go and do all these things. Great. That helps us keep the appropriate amount as a cash buffer. And then we don't have any impact to your lifestyle level from market volatility. So this slide just talks about, it's an output of some of our software that we have available. So we've got a variety of tools and a variety of software planning packages, but it's the collaborative conversation that we have through the years that matters. And what this shows is that there's different toggles or parameters that you can choose from as we get closer. So in this case, this person has more than enough to meet their plan. So they technically could increase their lifestyle. But if a person wanted to stop work earlier, they could decrease their lifestyle or look at other planning changes. So this person could also retire sooner, so the age at which you're done at. I often like to think and talk about, it's not at what age you're done at, it's what income level that you want to stop. So that is an individual preference, and it can be planned. So taking more or less risk, I don't necessarily love that concept, but it is a point. So, a lot of times we're taking less investment market risk as you get closer to retirement because you don't want to have that dictate your spend pattern. So then in retirement, we kind of want to lock in the certainty of your retirement and that retirement income by having lower risk or safer and more sustainable income streams, which is kind of what we've done through some of the choices on our private wealth platform. So this output from the software is just for those people that like ledgers and spreadsheets. So it's graphically showing what the planned spend is and where it's coming from different places, whether that's government pension, non-reg proceeds, TFSAs, other sources. You know, in some cases, we've got people with like rental properties or holding companies and dividends. All of that matters to kind of blueprinting it, but this is an example of that output of the plan that we can create together.
I don't want to get into too much detail here just for the sake of time, but oftentimes people ask me about CPP and OAS. And, depending on where you're going to live, this is also a consideration because your CPP will go with you. OAS, a lot more complicated, and how many years you spent in Canada and whether or not there's tax treaties where you are. But the thing that I want people to take home is the average of CPP in Canada that most people get is $831. As you can kind of see by your Shaw bill and your cell bill and your house expenses, it might pay for a few of those expenses. It's not going to pay for anything else. So I often say, you know what, like people ask me and say, you know what, if I'm still kind of working at 65, should I take it at 60? Should I not? Again, when we talk about the health of your wealth, if you're healthy and you're working and you're enjoying work, you may want to delay that pension, because what I put in there near the bottom is that if in fact you took it at 60 and it was $1,100 that you were going to get at 60, if you delayed it to 70, you now get $1,560 a month, which is a lot. That's a lot of difference. It's almost 5-6 grand, which can be, a holiday that you wanted. So I often say delay it if you're healthy. If you're not, then maybe we take it way earlier. OAS, on the other hand, it's just a government program. So you have to think of it, it's not your money, it's a social program to make sure that you have a minimum income, is how that's designed. So if you take it later, you increase it by 0.6, which isn't a ton. CPP is 0.7, but it's on a bigger number. So you always have to remember that. And then oftentimes people come to me and say, I'm really worried about the clawback. Well, if you have more than $81,000 of income in retirement, you will get it clawed back. But so there's some barriers around OAS, but it's not a large number. So that's kind of your parameters of how we look at things with that. Or if you definitely need your CPP or OAS to supplement you once you hit 60 or 65 and you have to be retired, then that would be a decision that we'll make at that point in time or close to. And we often look at that from a projection of health to now.
Yeah, the takeaway is that it's not a core foundation of your retirement. It's a useful layer and addition to the recipe of what you call your layered cake of income, Pam. I've heard you and seen you talk about this in previous presentations, where the recipe of your tax return from different sources in retirement will be different. So those layers might be thin, but they're very useful still. But don't think of it as the foundation of your plan, otherwise you'll be pretty disappointed. And this visual kind of shows that. So this again is just an output of one of our software programs. And I think it says, okay, well, your composition of your income from different sources will change over time. And then the tax efficiency is really yielded or is a byproduct of like a multi-decade planning approach, right? So then all of a sudden, if there's a big year of spend, maybe we take that from your non-taxable accounts, like a TFSA withdrawal. So the health of your wealth, that's a lot of what we've already discussed, a lot of what we do in our day job, that's your financial plan, right? So the ratios and the metrics and the tests, I don't really think it's great to benchmark against others. It's really, a factor of what you're doing for your own world. More importantly is the wealth of your health, right? Which is a little bit more on the uncontrollable side of things. I tend to kind of drive and say, okay, even in your financial plan, what's truly controllable versus not? And how do we, if we can prepare against adverse effects from the uncontrollable, great. The wealth of your health, it's like, we're going to do another session on that in the future based on like demand and request. But really, do you know your family history? You cannot just rely on the health system or a health professional that you may or may not have to do it for you. You've got to get proactive, create your own baselines, look at what online programs there are to access the health stats, your health history. So that's something that's equally important. So a lot of times what I'm talking about is not necessarily just lifespan, but Pam, you and I talk about health span. So unfortunately, we often see clients have their ability to have their travel worldwide taken away because they can't get proper coverage. So again, back to living life today, it's like, what does your health span look like? And if your health span is amazing and you're going to be, super aged to 110, then again, that comes back to like what we plan for. If it's not as good and it's just more standard, it's just, all of those components get built into your plan.
Definitely.
So what you want now and in retirement, like these are the things that we're all searching for, right? This is the benefit from this. And so as much as we've talked about creating that financial plan and retirement forecast together, this is what you really get from it. So, especially when you're done work, there's some stress and there's some, a counseling, supposedly there in terms of like, a lot of times you've seen your net worth increase through accumulation years and then through decumulation years. That stresses a lot of people out. And so that's part of the plan. And if we've got, a way to replace some of that through insurance or legacy planning, that might be a factor. Otherwise, you just end up being fine with the decumulation and the lowered net worth because you've got that plan in place. But really, a clarified vision of what matters most to you is what we've always tried to help with day in, day out, quarter in, quarter out, year in, year out. So balancing living for today, is so key, right? But knowing what you want to achieve is helpful because then we can map that for you, whether it's helping kids and grandkids or whether it's the kitchen reno, like filter us more and feed us more data and more targets and goals and a vision for that.
Absolutely, we will come up with the plan, and it'll be as detailed as you want it. Some people like 50 to 100 pages, and some people like 4, and we're able to do all of them.
Yeah. So what's next? Might be that retirement worksheet. We've got tools like that. We can share that. I think that's a useful method. We can relay that to you. We can get into that software. We can do a forecast or update your last forecast. But then don't be afraid to also share more information and more material that you might have on your own. So I think, the goal of today was just to look at giving you ideas and how to be more specific with what your role is there and in telling you what we can do for you. And we're eager to do more for you and work together more.
Absolutely. Trish, do we have any questions on this session so far?
Not yet.
Okay, so we'll wait just a couple minutes or two if anyone has a good question that they'd like to ask. Otherwise, we'll close off the session and say to everybody, thank you for attending and thanks for always being there. And hopefully we've given you some clarity on what you need to do to create a full financial work optional plan with a whole ton of detail. Hopefully you've gotten that as a great takeaway.
Yeah, no questions yet, Kelly.
Great.
Have a great
Well,
day,
thanks
everybody.
everybody for attending. Have a great day.